All of these phrases are an eyebrow raise for a therapist. If we hear from our clients that their partner is saying these things, or if they're saying these things to their partner, that this is a moment where we're like, Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name is Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today, we're talking about signs of abuse because I think it's important. Before we get into this video, I do want to be clear. We've talked about this in past videos. I don't know when this is going up, so I don't know in what order you'll see these, but we've talked in past videos that my emotional range might be a little bit reduced today because, as it turns out, I emote a lot with my top lip, which is currently in a lot of pain. It's a long story, doesn't matter. The point is that opening and closing my big ol' yapper hurts me for now. So if I look like I'm not enjoying myself or like my emotional range is greatly reduced, it's only because of that. I love being here. I love you. And I love doing this, but not when it hurts me. So it is what it is. We're gonna power through. So let's talk about signs of abuse. What an inappropriate affect for me to have in talking. I'm uncomfortable, so I'm laughing because I don't know what to do with my hands. Okay, so the first sign that you are with an abuser is that they are extremely, me literally being like, what reading my homework. Okay, don't laugh. Don't laugh. Ow. Okay, the first sign that you are with an abuser is that they are extremely sensitive. There is a lot of discourse. First and foremost, there's a lot of discourse on the internet about HSPs, which are highly sensitive people. This is not what I'm referring to. Also, it's just a friendly, like a fun little fun fact. HSPs is a really high crossover. Like the Venn diagram of people who are HSPs and people who are autistic is like a circle. That's a conversation for a different day. But I'm not referring to people who are HSPs or like empathic or people who can like intuit or read people's emotions. What I'm referring to is people who have very sensitive and fragile egos. It's very common for people who are abusive to dictate to you and to the people around them that there are forbidden topics, that there are things that we cannot and will not talk about, and things that you'll be punished for bringing up because they sort of live and die by their perception from the outside world and are especially wounded and irritated by people poking a hole in this little balloon that is their very fragile ego. And this is a way that they self-inflate their self-worth. Ways that this might show up in your relationship is having forbidden topics like we talked about earlier. If there's like a particular subject that's very sensitive that you're just like blacklisted, you're not allowed to discuss. This can also look like structuring y'all's life and relationship around their emotions, even as their emotions fluctuate or like might be subject to wild changes. And this will often be potentially to the detriment of yours, right? It won't matter whether or not structuring your life by their relationship inconveniences you or even hurts you, because they will sell you this message that like doing this their way is what's most important, and that you're either being selfish or you're being dramatic by having your own emotional responses. Okay, this can also look like really rigid rules in the relationship, insisting that somebody abide by a very closed off and narrow window of what their gender is supposed to be doing. Regardless of gender, though, this can often show up as just having a very particular idea and like very specific interpretation of like where the rules are, where the bumpers are, if you will, and refusing to deviate from that. This is usually, again, to the detriment of your emotions and often to like the inconvenience of everybody around them, specifically you in this case. Okay, before we go any further though, I do want to talk to you about this week's sponsor, which is Dipsea. I have been revamping my self-care routine actually, and I have really been enjoying adding Dipsea audio stories into my leisure time. For those of you that don't know, Dipsea is an app that is filled with hundreds of short and spicy audio stories. They have a genuinely impressive library of stuff. They have everything from werewolf smut to vacation hookups. So no matter what mood you're in, they really have you covered. And new content gets added every week. So if you want to revisit your faves over and over again, no shame, but you can also get lost in something new whenever you're ready. I have been really loving Dipsea's modern approach to romance because the stories and the audio are genuinely just so high quality, and I really want you guys to experience that. So for listeners of the show, Dipsea is offering an extended 30-day free trial when you go to dipseastories.com/Mickey. That's 30 days of full access for free when you go to DIPSEA stories.com/Mickey, dipseastories.com/Mickey. Thank Thank you so much to Dipsy for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and hop back in. Additionally, in like real lived life, this will also look like your partner becoming extremely emotionally dysregulated when their ego is wounded or when things don't go their way. So this can look like anger, but this can also look like somebody who flies off the handle and becomes like extremely sad or extremely anxious to the degree that they are sometimes either explicitly telling you to or implying that it's your job to soothe them when their emotions are, especially when their emotions are like outbursts, essentially. Somebody who refuses to regulate themselves and develop the skills to regulate themselves is an eyebrow raise, typically from a therapist. This is one of those things that like when clients come in and they tell us like, yeah, you know, my partner tells me, you know, or like it doesn't tell me, but will just fly off the handle and like can't control themselves and they need me, right? They need me to help them, to soothe them. They like can't take care of their emotions. Oftentimes the question from a therapist is going to be why, right? Is therapy not an accessible resource to them? And if that's the case, do they not have access to any other resources like self-help books, like podcasts, like online learning, like life coaching, going to the library, talking to friends and family? There's lots of resources that are available at our disposal, even if we don't have access to something like therapy, which to be fair, a lot of us don't. But somebody who refuses to use those resources that are available to them and instead leans really heavily on their partner all the time, if not, you know, super, super often, is an eyebrow raise from us because it's breeding a dependency, right? It's selling the abused party the message that the abuser cannot take care of themselves and that this is why it's okay for them to isolate you from your friends and family, for example, because they can't exist without you. This can also take the form of a partner telling you that they will unalive themselves if you leave them because they simply cannot live without you. That's an inherently coercive and abusive thing to do. If somebody says that to you, please talk to your safe people about that because there's no world where that's an okay or safe thing for a partner to do. It is inherently coercive and abusive. The second sign that I want to talk to you about is verbal bullying. This can obviously take the place of like overt bullying where somebody is being very abusive to you or rude or judgmental to you, but this can often take the place or take the form of like playful bullying or when somebody is teasing you. I want to encourage people to be clear and to get clear in your relationships about the difference between playful teasing and when you and your partner have a relationship like that, right? You guys have seen me and Erin, especially on the podcast, make fun of each other and tease each other. That's founded in a mutual understanding and a mutual respect that A, that's okay in our relationship, and B, that if at any point it goes too far, that somebody is willing and available to be like, oh my God, I am so sorry, right? I didn't mean it like that. Like, let's take a moment to regulate. Let me apologize. Let's work through this and be communicative about this. But in an abusive relationship, we're lacking those two components, right? Often there is an absence of clear communication about what the boundaries are for that because quite frankly, they don't care. And also there's a lack of remorse or willingness to engage in apologizing or communication or being present with you and your emotions. Instead, this will often look like them turning the tables on you to gaslight you and say, you know, you're taking it too seriously, or why can't you take a joke? Or I was just kidding. It wasn't that serious. You're being dramatic, or, you know, you're taking it too seriously and you need to calm down. All of these phrases are an eyebrow raise for a therapist. If we hear from our clients that their partner is saying these things, or if they're saying these things to their partner, that this is a moment where we're like, maybe we need to have some education about what abuse in relationships actually looks like in real time. Because again, we as a society do a really terrible job of representing what abuse actually looks like in media. Oftentimes it's very like Law and Order SVU, which like has a place in the world, right? It's important for us to educate about those types of abuses too. And I think it's really important that we be honest about what abuse looks like in a more like real life application, because people often miss these early warning signs. And by the time they realize like, oh my God, I don't think this relationship is safe, we're in too deep, right? Like now we have a whole lot of entanglement that needs to be unentangled, and that can be really difficult and really scary to do. This can also take the form of name calling, which can be more obvious and overt, but also more playful, again, when we like label someone a particular way that we know they're sensitive about. For example, telling somebody that they eat really fast, right? It's not inherently like a name calling thing. You're not necessarily calling somebody like fat or a pig, but it does carry a connotation if somebody's sensitive to that. And then again, this can turn into the gaslighting of like, what? I didn't mean it like that. It wasn't that way. Like you're just taking it a certain way. You need to relax, right? This can also turn into or take the form of public humiliation. This is one of those ones that it's a big eyebrow raise for therapists, especially because if we hear that your partner has a tendency to put you in situations where you're the butt of the joke and then again, refuse to apologize or gaslight you about your feelings and like very valid response to being made the butt of the joke repeatedly, especially if they know that it's a sore spot or a button for you, this is abusive behavior. It's not funny, it's not a joke, and you're not being dramatic. You have a right to feel the way that you feel, and your partner is the last person on the face of planet Earth who should ever exploit or utilize these buttons and sore spots against you and then refuse to apologize and refuse to be available for the way that they made you feel. The reason that this is a warning sign for therapists is because it can potentially be a sign of further abuses to come, especially your abuser making you feel like you're lucky to be with them. The public humiliation, the name calling, the verbal bullying, all of this can sort of serve and add up to this picture of you feeling like you have less worth or value in the relationship. And again, like, oh, you're not going to find anyone better than me, right? Or good luck finding somebody else if you decide to leave me. All of this can be weaponized against you if this is done repeatedly over time. It really does a number on somebody's self-esteem. And this can be a problem. Again, once we've reached this level of entanglement, it can be really difficult to convince somebody that, like, yes, this is abusive, and yes, you do deserve better once they've broken down your self-esteem over time. So this is why it's important to catch it early and to have these open and honest discussions about what abuse actually looks like. The third thing that I want to talk to you about today is the phrase, when things are good, they're really good, and when things are bad, they're really bad. This is one of those ones that is like an antenna raise for therapists, like an immediate, like, tell me more about that, please. Because the common misconception about abuse, because we represent it in a Law & Order SVU type of way, is that it's sort of statically and consistently bad, right? This is not true. We've talked ad nauseum about the cycle of abuse here on the channel. And for reference, I'll put it up here. But the cycle of abuse is essentially a process wherein abuse takes place and then we have an apology, or there's usually some phase where your partner is being like nicer to you, and then we have a little bit of stability or a little bit of like normalcy, and then we have tension building, and then we have another event where something bad happens. The thing that I want to talk to you about in this section specifically is the behavior of love bombing. This can happen at the beginning of a relationship where, for example, on a first or second date, you might not know this person really well, right? But they're sending flowers to your work. They're wanting to see you 2, 3, 4, 5 days in a row. They're buying you really expensive things, or they're saying all of these really sweet and kind things to you, or they're calling you incessantly. They start calling you by a pet name really early on in the relationship. There can be all of these different signs that this person is intentionally, like, literally bombing you with all of this love and affection and attention because they're trying to worm their way into your life. And also the calling you pet names really early and trying to create this like normalcy as if they've always been a part of your life is especially a red flag. This can communicate a desire to like really entangle themselves in your life before you get a window into how abusive and shitty they can be. Because then by that point, this is when we start to hear the things about like, well, when it's really good, it's really good. And when it's really bad, it's really bad. But we just have our like bad spells and, things get better and it's all fine, right? Except that it's not fine. I lost my train of thought. The other thing about this that's important to note, though, is that love bombing can also serve the purpose of invalidating your concerns or your feelings later. So them wanting to sort of worm their way into your life and create this normalcy and like, oh, we're so entangled and all of that is very dangerous. But it can also be a way that they tell you, when we have really bad fights or when they're really abusive to you or when they humiliate you in front of your friends, like, oh, like, how are you going to be mad at me when I just bought you that designer purse 2 weeks ago? Or like, I sent flowers to your office literally yesterday. How are you going to say that our relationship is bad? This is not healthy. That's not normal behavior. That's abusive. And it's also invalidating. It's, I think, okay for people to be flawed people. It's somewhat common, I would say, for people to be flawed people and to struggle with taking accountability. That's not what I'm talking about. The purpose of us having this conversation is to identify patterns in people's relationships. And this is why that phrase is particularly concerning, because if we're noticing like really good and then it's really bad and it's really good and it's really bad, that's a problem, right? It's one thing for us to have a blow up fight or to just have a really difficult time with a particular issue. Maybe we both have attachment issues or we have sore spots that tend to like irritate each other's sore spots. That's very different than somebody consistently, repeatedly engaging in this pattern of behavior where they are really, really loving and they do all of the right things and they're super kind, they're really sweet, they're very nice to you, and then this tension builds and then they're fucking terrible to you. They humiliate you in public, they treat you like shit. Sometimes Sometimes abuse takes the form of physical abuse, obviously, physical abuse or sexual abuse, but it's often preceded by emotional and social abuse that we as a society just really don't talk about. So I want to encourage folks to be aware of this and to notice these warning signs, and especially if it's cyclical, if it's pattern in nature, please talk to your safe people about this. One of the things that we know about successfully leaving and avoiding abusive relationships is having an open line of communication with our family, our friends, our chosen family, our community in some capacity, which is also why this behavior of love bombing you and creating this like really intense sense of connection with you can be dangerous, because it can also be used as a reason why it's totally okay for your abuser to separate you from your family of origin or your safe people. Please know that anybody who has a concerted effort or attempt or intent to separate you from your community has malintent. That's not an okay behavior. It is inherently abusive and coercive. Anyone who loves you should also love the fact that you have beautiful, loving, kind, happy relationships with your friends, with your family, with your coworkers, with your community at large. Those are all important parts of what makes up a person. And so if somebody intentionally is trying to separate you or is like implying that they want you to leave those connections in the past, talk to your safe people about that, because it's never appropriate for someone to do that to you. Really quick, I did forget one thing in this section. I also want to highlight the harm in the love bombing behavior, in that it can also serve as like an excuse for an abuser continuing to abuse you in private by saying like, no one will believe you, right? Because I send flowers to your office, or because I'm really sweet to you at our date nights where everyone can see you. And people who say these things to you have malintent, right? This is inherently an abusive behavior. And if anybody ever says this to you, again, first of all, if you're able to, please leave that relationship. But obviously that's difficult for people in a lot of regards. And so again, at the very least, talk to your safe people about that. Having these conversations and this communication is sometimes literally life-saving. And having a community that can help to pool resources and ideas and like emotional bandwidth is the way sometimes that people find themselves able to leave those relationships. So if you notice these things in your partner, please know that it's not diagnostic criteria, right? This is meant to be broad strokes education and learning, and so I can't speak to your specific situation. That said, again, I'm going to link some resources in the description. I always have stuff linked in the description for crisis services and things like that, but I will link some specific stuff today for intimate partner violence and of the like. Use those resources at your discretion. There's lots of really wonderful and kind people who do this work for a living and can help to provide you a wealth of resources and knowledge to help you move through and ultimately escape a situation that's unsafe for you. So big love to you if you're going through that. If you notice these things, again, please talk to your safe people about it. If you like the video, you can like the video. You can subscribe to the channel. We do talk about educational stuff like this. We also do a pop culture moment that's kind of fun, so you can save for that. And then share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.